Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see some new faces here in Data Matters. I've met a lot of you over the course of the last couple of days, and it's just fantastic that the community keeps growing and everybody shows up to these kinds of events. Everybody have a good time last night? Excellent, excellent. Well, I was going to talk to you today about cross-device identity management. I have a couple of people who are getting set up right now, are going to come out and join me. Luminaries in the Krux community that are using our platform as the core identity layer to bring data in from third parties, make the data actionable within their environment, and do things like analytics, attribution, and activation. So I wanted to take a moment and talk about identity management, ground everybody on the terms we're going to be talking about, and make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So the first thing to think about when you think about identity management is the fact that consumers have this proliferation of devices, channels, browsers, Internet of Things, all of these different opportunities to engage with content and with messaging. And as marketers and publishers, we need to think about the fact that it's actually the person behind the device that we wish to reach. And cookies don't drink beer, mobile devices don't drink beer. I drink beer. And the point of advertising, marketing, content, messaging, experience, engagement has to be to the person, not to the device. The device is the conduit, the necessary evil, if you will, to reach that consumer. When we think about device management and identity management, there are a huge number of different ways to think about devices and the ways that consumers reach content and are reached by us for messaging. When Dave Smith from Pandora comes out in a moment, he can talk about the 1,000 platforms that Pandora is currently deployed on at the moment. And this transcends things like typical web environments where we have first-party cookies, typical mobile environments where we have mobile device IDs, interconnected devices, and the Internet of Things. But we do want to keep as part of the identity model things like cookies, things like mobile IDs, things like PII keys, email addresses, phone numbers, postal addresses. These are all different ways to identify individuals and understand their engagement with content. Things like IP address are also interesting ways to understand who is engaging with content. When we think about the device model at Krux, we actually built, through lucky circumstance, I think, Vivek tells a great story in 2012 when we were responding to a need from one of our customers. They wanted to keep track of the cookie ID for users that were anonymously looking at content on their site, but also add the subscriber ID when those users were digital or print subscribers. And that might have been in 2012. And what we did is we built an infrastructure for them, an architecture which was a flat device graph, and allowed them to move data into the device graph keyed natively to how the data existed in their environment. And we built the capacity in 2012 to have more than one ID refer to the same person. And that gave us this infrastructure with the rise of mobile and the proliferation of devices and channels that we could then accommodate all of this new diversity. And this graduated into identity management probably in 2014 with some of the people that are going to be on the stage as sort of anchor customers there. So when we think about identity management, it is not a media solution. You're sliding out. Let me just introduce my fellow panelists, then I'll finish my remarks. So we have Dave Smith, who is the VP of Monetization at Pandora. We have, next to him is Dan Keller, who is the VP of Lifetime Value at Kellogg. And next to him is Stephen Quach, who is the Director of Online Marketing at Hotels.com. So gentlemen, I'm just going to make a few more closing remarks here about identity and what we're talking about, and then I'd like you to introduce yourselves. So When we think about identity management, it's not a media solution, and it's not about reaching consumers on mobile channels. It's a data solution, it's an architecture solution. It's the idea that I can look out into the sea of data and I can draw conclusions about people. And why do I want to do that? Well, we need to think about relevant messaging, and we need to make sure that the consumer is seeing relevant messaging throughout their engagement with all of the different activities that we as marketers might have. We need to think about how users are engaging with content and make sure that content stays relevant and the site experience stays relevant for how consumers come back to us as publishers. We have to think about waste and frequency in how messaging is delivered to consumers. If you have 4 devices that a consumer is using, you're going to overserve that user probably by a factor of 4 in terms of messaging that individual. And we've got some great use cases that talk about how frequency management, when applied to an individual, to a person, is going to drive greater value and put working media to better use. And then that lets us think about applying this identity data from an attribution perspective. And Stephen may talk about some interesting problems that he's solving at Hotels.com, where we think about messaging to consumers on one channel and having them convert on another channel, and being able to see that from an attribution perspective and tying it all together. So with that introduction, Dave, why don't you start off by giving us a brief introduction of you and what you do at Pandora, and talking about your challenges and opportunities in identity.
Thanks. So I'm Dave Smith. I'm the VP of Monetization and Yield, by the way, at Pandora. I manage our data assets and sometimes I call them our physical assets, but in the digital space, there's nothing really physical. So our inventory assets as well, and think about how we can leverage those assets to bring more value to our advertisers so that we can extract hopefully a little more than our fair share of that value. I think when it comes to cross-device management, and I mentioned this a little yesterday morning, at Pandora, on our platform, we are truly blessed. We have the gift that keeps on giving, which is that every single interaction between Pandora and a listener is to a logged-in listener. Listeners want to be logged in. They want to have the same station list on their mobile phone as they have on their Sonos device, as they have on their desktop computer when they're listening from work, as they have on their refrigerator or in their car. They want access to that same music that they've built up and personalized, and we've helped them personalize. And so we have that consistent login link across all the different devices we see people on. So internally for us, cross-device is very simple. Where it gets complicated is when we have to go out into the ecosystem. And one of my favorite concepts there is no cookies, no clue. So the vast majority of the ecosystem around data has been built up in a cookie environment. We're 85% in-app mobile. Nobody knows what to do with a device ID to save their lives. And so what we need help on, what we work with Krux on, and frankly a number of other folks as well, is how do we bring offline data, whether that's third-party data, whether it's advertiser data, whether it's attribution data, how do we bring that data that's in a whole range of different keys and identifiers into our platform so that we can either target off of it or optimize with it or measure campaign effectiveness with it. So that's probably our biggest challenge.
Fantastic. Dan?
Hi, Dan Keller. I'm Vice President Lifetime Value at Kellogg, which is a relatively new spot for me. I started out building a relationship marketing capability for Kellogg, which evolved into not only relationship marketing, but a rewards platform. The idea there being to build a first-party database so we can have a one-to-one relationship with customers, end users of our product, because our true customers are the retailers, but having the relationship directly with the end user is critical to us. In doing so and putting in the rewards program, not only do we learn about the people in our database, we communicate with them on a regular basis through kind of the traditional email, SMS type methods, but we also start picking up purchase data. And purchase data is really critical to us because normally in a CPG, you don't have access to the end user and what they're purchasing. So bringing in purchase data into our first party data is really important. And then where the lifetime value comes into is now taking what the basic principles of relationship marketing and expanding them across the entire universe of consumer touch points. So it's really critical to us when we're communicating with consumers, no matter what the channel is, that we know who the consumer is, we know what they're interested in, so we can provide a relevant message to those consumers or households across multiple devices. And a key to that is it needs to be a different message for person A versus person B versus person C, and we need to understand what that message should be so it's relevant and timely. And then across multiple devices, we don't want to bury someone in messages and miss 3 others. We'd like to be able to control the frequency, the exposure, the rate of exposure, and we also want to get out of the kind of very narrow brand by brand by brand communication and start looking at the portfolio of brands that are appropriate for an individual or a household, so we can manage the portfolio and the exposures of the portfolio into the household. So the big challenge for us is translating our first party data, which is keyed off of name and physical address. We also have email address, but that's a different one. But taking that and then assigning the appropriate media identifications to those people, understanding what we're providing to them in forms of communication, and then most importantly, being able to determine if what we're communicating to these people is actually making a difference in our sales. Because ultimately, I'm measured, and what we're all measured on is, can we drive more sales than we otherwise would have driven, and can I do it efficiently? So that would be a big challenge here.
Fantastic, thank you. Stephen?
Cool. Stephen Quach, Senior Director of Digital and Programmatic for Hotels.com. If Dave is blessed, then we're cursed at Hotels.com.
Glass half full.
I already told you I hate you off stage, so we're all clear. But we have a very low sign-in rate when people are shopping. That's just that's not us. It's the category. When you're booking travel, outside of AA and some of the sort of drive direct, the hoteliers and the suppliers and such, who have less of a problem, you're shopping and you're comparing, and you only want to sign in or give me your email address once you book. That's problematic. Because I can't personalize the experience for you. This one-to-one marketing, this customer-centric marketing that we strive to be really good at, is just a goal right now, and we're challenged by things like identity and authenticity, things like that. So what we do get on the booking form is an email address, and we'll talk about, you touched on it, but a little unreliable. People have many different email addresses, and frankly, a lot of the marketer emails go to a junk folder that people don't actually check. So hey, that's an issue. The other issue I would say that we're bumping up against is mobile. Now, mobile has been great for travel. So this thing about last-minute booking, right, has always been a thing, right? But now with mobile, it's become much more aggressive and on steroids. People are waiting until they get off a plane before they check their apps to get the best deal, because they know they'll get rewarded. It's a challenge because not only are they not signed in on mobile web, we are pushing an app where there's an always sign-on experience, so that's great. And as our app penetration grows, then that sort of mitigates that issue a little bit. But the other issue that mobile represents is attribution. And you kind of touched on this. But look, we're still on last touch. It's a problem. We've cursed last touch for the last 10 years, but it's going to stick around, right, in some capacity. But last touch has been broken for different reasons, and now it's even more broken with mobile. Because you're saying last touch on desktop, you're not saying last touch on mobile, so you have to stitch those things together, right? That last touch isn't actually last touch unless you got that full device graph. And then there's issues that Chris brought up around, all right, so I'm investing all my dollars over here, and take Facebook as a platform, for instance. We are sort of, we do way too much desktop on Facebook, I'll be the first to admit, and the reason is because we could track it, right? But the desktop audience on Facebook is stagnant, right? And so 80% of their growth from the ad revenues from mobile, and yet we're sitting there still playing on desktop, which is a problem. And so hyper competition, because that audience isn't growing, we're paying higher rates, performance isn't as good. So yes, we're pushing over to mobile as quickly as we can, but we have to solve the cross-device attribution issue, and it all comes down to identity across devices. So it's a fun part of our business. Don't get me wrong, mobile is driving our business. It's most days half of our traffic actually comes to us from mobile. You know, on a day-to-day basis, probably 40% of our 30 to 40% of our transactions are coming to us from mobile. So it's driving our business for sure. We should point marketing towards that side as well. But yeah, it's a problem.
Thank you. So a number of great topics just brought up in this. One of the things I think is particularly interesting is maybe we can talk about how Stephen and Dan, you as marketers are trying to reach consumers. Dave, you as a premium publisher are trying to make consumer reach available, but that the key sets are different, either because Dan, you might be experiencing consumer reach in a desktop environment, and Dave would be unable to activate those cookies, or even Stephen, as you talk about, well, I've got an engagement on mobile, but I need to reach them somewhere else in order to make sure that when they get off that plane, you know, your brand, Hotels.com, is in their mind in order for that last-minute booking. So Dave, maybe you could start us off a little bit. You had talked about reaching out to third parties. How do you do it with advertisers, and where are the challenges there in getting data and getting key sets that you can activate?
Yeah, so those keys, which keys are relevant varies a lot by advertiser. So some advertisers start with, you know, good old-fashioned home name and address, zip code, and, you know, they know an actual consumer and you know, need to onboard that data in some ways. You know, in an ideal world, we've got an advertiser that's got a rich mobile, in-app mobile data set.
Do you actually have any of those?
And we can cross, you know, mobile device IDs all day long, and that's a thing of beauty. But what we find is that those match keys tend to, they vary even within you know, any one individual advertiser. And so we really need to find ways to match in on multiple keys. If we can put, you know, a device ID and a cookie and an email address, and in some cases even an IP address if we're after more household level data, out into the ecosystem and try and find, you know, where on this, you know, on this advertiser, where do they have data to match up, and then bring it all back together. And that's where I think in your opening remarks you talked about, you know, a flat device ID graph or identity graph that allows you to bring, you know, signal data from multiple different keyed sources into one spot. And that's how, you know, that's how we have to work with advertisers. And so, you know, we're working with Krux, but we're also working with, you know, Axiom and Merkle and Experian and, you know, a number of other folks who sit on some of those multiple key data sets so that we can meet our advertiser clients where they're coming from, where they've parked their data and where they've invested in, you know, in that identity.
And Dan, do you think that these are good opportunities for you as a marketer to?
Yeah, I mean, we're one of the marketers that starts with the old-fashioned name and physical address, because name and physical address gives us the best ability to match third-party data, which we use a lot. We have not used much second-party data, which you guys have been talking about a lot, but it gives us a really good way to match. And then the trick is to take the first-party data we have with name and physical address and tie it to cookies and device IDs. And we're working on that, and we're just finishing up identifying a partner to do that with. But once we get that, then we want to be able to manage the exposures against that, and we need to have a common set of identities. And our identity is different than the way you track identity, and it's different than the way you track identity. So you got to have a common thread, but the common thread could be the device ID or the cookie that is common, but then you have to have a place for that all to reside and come together and then manage it from there, which I think you guys, Krux, are building or have semi-built already that capability, which enables us to do that. But that's really, really important, and for us to be able to define the identification across multiple partners.
Well, and I think the point you make about it, you know, we talk a lot about targeting, we talk a lot about bringing that data onto the platform for targeting, but the other side, the measurement side, is at least as important, you know, being able to find that conversion event, or, you know, in your case, you know, maybe it's store sales lift data,
right.
And bring that back into that system and, you know, and do a full, you know, campaign effectiveness is the way I think about it, model, so that you really know, you know, what the...
Right, and what we're trying to get to is exactly that, because we have to know who we talked to and what did we talk to them about, but then we need to understand, did it change purchase behavior, and we need to understand, did it change purchase behavior quickly enough that we could actually modify what we're doing on the fly. So if what I'm talking to you about isn't working, I can change what I'm talking about, and I need the ability to change how I produce content, which is a dramatic change versus 6-month TV spot. I need like 1 week or less the ability to change content so we can actually get a flywheel going where we're putting content in the marketplace, adjusting on the fly. I might have 3 people that I think are semi-identical, but I provide 3 different messages to them, and I shift to the message that's working the best for all 3 as soon as I can read it. So I'm not waiting 6 months to a year for a marketing mix model to tell me it worked or it didn't work and I've forgotten what I did.
Yeah.
I want to be able to do it almost in real time and adjust on the fly, so I haven't spent the money. I can still adjust how I'm spending the money to drive positive
the
results.
data needs to be fresh, right?
Yeah.
So you deliver the message at that time. Otherwise, they've moved on to another stage or phase, and you've lost the opportunity. I think scale makes everything interesting, right? And so when you talk about data match tables and the ability and sort of loss of data and sort of depleting audiences when you go from one platform to another, it hurts your scale. And so it's a direct sort of assault on what we're trying to do as smart marketers, right? We're trying to segment as much as possible, almost to the individual user if it was scalable, and then have a personal message to them. Right place, right time, right message, right? And so you've got these smaller segments that you know are super qualified, but as soon as you pass them on to a provider, then all of a sudden it's not interesting anymore, right? I can drive 100% conversion on 30 people, and that's not going to run my business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're gonna drown by that metric, by conversion. So I think it's important, right? And that's why we chose Krux. That's why DMPs are important. So yeah, I mean, super excited about it. But it's all about scalable personalization for us. It's the cost benefit's got to be there.
I think scale raises another interesting point in my mind, which is you guys come at some of this from a slightly different standpoint. So you really are, in every case, after the individual consumer that you know something about, whereas you need both to reach those individual consumers and people like them.
Right.
How do you think about, I'm going to take your job, Chris, for a minute.
Yeah.
How do you think
Wouldn't
about...
be the first time.
How do you think about look-alike modeling and blowing? You have you've got great data on a relatively small percentage, I would assume,
right.
Of your total consumer base.
Yeah, we've probably got 15% total US in our database right now, which is nice but not sufficient. But there are partners that have purchase-based data. Nielsen and Oracle both have purchase-based data on significant numbers of people, scalable. So it is possible for us to access purchase-based data on a group of people. We don't individually know who they are, but that's the primary basis to get us scale. But we've really gone more towards using real data as opposed to, we certainly do look-alike modeling, but that's diminished as we're able to use real data. And through those sources, we can access 70 to 90 million. So those are getting into real numbers, and that's covering the vast majority of our potential user base. And we're able to do that across all addressable media. The trick is then tying it back to the individuals fast enough and in a cost-effective manner to measure is it having the desired effect.
And the inherent delays that you face in getting that purchase data.
Yeah.
Steven's purchase data, you know about it in 50 milliseconds.
And he has direct access to it.
Exactly, exactly. It's an interesting point, Dave, that you brought up is the household implication. And when we talk about cross-device identity management, the big innovation and the big value is always talked about as people. And Krux is the people data activation company, and I think that's the right thing to be. But there's also an interesting implication of the household and the fact that Dave, you and your wife may share no digital attributes together and no look-alike model would ever say that you are in similar targeting groups, but from a household purchase decision, maybe that's food and healthy lifestyles and the things that Dan is trying to manage. Maybe it's vacation travel that Steven's trying to manage. You two actually have very high level of similarity because you have dinner together every night and you talk about those issues. So I don't know if any of you have opinions about moving from devices to people, but then people to households, and how you might wish to market to households and use identity management to understand the different people and apply attribution that way. I mean, talk about a view through conversion, right? I message to your wife and then you go to buy something the next day, right? That's the 2.0 of view through conversions. Any thoughts about that?
For us, household is important, and our first-party data is technically individuals, but we think of them as households because the individuals oftentimes representing the vast majority of purchases in the household. And then the household becomes very, very important because we have a multitude of brands like a lot of people in the room have. Some of the brands are going to appeal more to one person in the household, others to another person in the household. But it's interesting to look at the household and what's actually coming into the household. And when you look at an individual brand with blinders on, Special K should be female 25 to 39 with a few demographic characteristics around that. But we know that there's a heck of a lot of households where the person buying Special K is also bringing in Keebler cookies and Pringles potato chips. So it's not exactly what an individual brand would picture. So it's really important to understand the household and to be able to put that together, to recognize the individual differences, but also what's the combined effect inside the household.
Are you guys, I imagine this is a goal, but are you guys wanting to target different people in the household with a different Kellogg's product? And do you guys do that today?
Yes,
Yeah.
but we do it probably less than with perfect intent. I mean, we're doing it almost accidentally because we have a tendency to think and work brand by brand. So Special K runs their effort against people that they know are buying Special K, and Eggo Waffles runs an effort against people that we know buy Eggo Waffles, and happenstance is that they're quite often the same household, but it's more accident than intent.
Right. So our household issue is that, so perfect example, by textbook definition, I'm the travel expert on this panel in my family. I don't book any of my travel for the family, my wife does. Right? So if you're targeting me because I'm always researching other travel sites or my own site, and you're targeting me because I'm a high intender or appear to be, then you're wrong, and you should be going after my wife. And so even if you've narrowed me down to the household, you're probably wasting money. Now you're right. At the dinner table, we're talking about, oh, should we book this? Should we book that? Certainly, I'm being involved in the conversation, but the ultimate,
To some extent.
to a certain extent,
A slight influence.
I might write the check. I don't know. Like maybe that's it. But the decision maker is my wife, so we need to get down to her. And it's what we call, at a broader scale, it's what we call travel arrangers within the company. And it's the folks that are making the travel decisions at scale. So when you take a step back from the household, you actually have people out there that book all their travel for their friends and family because they just want the rewards.
Right.
And so it's almost like a bartering service with your friends and family. And then from a corporate level, you've got travel arrangers that do it for unmanaged businesses that actually do it for their whole entire company. And maybe the admin or whoever the travel arranger is reaps the benefits of the rewards, something like that. But that's, you want to get to the travel arranger. So that's household becomes a challenge.
I think from our perspective, the individual versus household issue plays out in an interesting way. We have to be very careful with a lot of the third-party data that we buy because some of it is household-based, others of it are very individual-based.
I would actually suggest the majority is household.
I think that's
and
right.
not too far from what you said, Dan. It is perceived as individual or even device level. And that's just an artifact of how we run this business, but is actually collected and managed at a household level.
Exactly.
Often
And
it is.
so we have to be very careful in how we use different data sets to make sure because some marketers, as you've heard right here, right? Some marketers are quite happy with the household targeting, others really need the individual. And so we have to be very careful with what data set are we using and what are its origins, and how do we deploy that in an appropriate way.
I'd like to see identity management be able to bring us to a 2.0 of understanding the provenance of data. Where did it come from? Give you as business people the ability to make decisions about how it should be used, and in the end try to figure those things out about arrangers, deciders, influencers, et cetera. I have 2 children in my household who are on the path to be super influencers, right? They will make no purchase decisions, but they will influence, I think, quite a number of them. Sure. I think we're almost out of time. I wanted to just see if we had any closing thoughts. One thing that was on my mind is the stability of IDs. Possibly not the topic to introduce 90 seconds before the panel is over, but the idea that identity management gives us an umbrella on top of IDs that have different levels of stability. So Stephen, if you want to give us any comments you have about that.
No, I think it's something that's, obviously important, something that we're hoping to leverage the Krux system, and as you guys advance in that arena to to do. I mean, I'll quickly say that I'm super humbled and honored to be in this panel and amongst you guys marketers, because we're new to the Krux platform and the DMP, and so we're looking to do a lot of these things that you guys have done for years, right? So, I mean, that's certainly something that keeps me up at night, added to the list.
Dan, you were anchoring on postal, which is the most stable ID.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The name and the physical address is the most stable, but still not perfectly stable, so we're constantly updating for that through the normal NCOA process. But then when it gets to the cookies and the device IDs, much less stable, and cookies are constantly changing over. Email address, and we were mentioning earlier, email address, we certainly have an email address for everybody, but is it their primary email address, secondary, third, do they even use it? And then when you try to use that as a matching vehicle, your match rates are incredibly low. When you're using physical address, but against people that have physical address, the match rates are incredibly high. So physical address is really helping us, and that's, like you said, our most stable.
And I think, from our perspective, Krux has done a great job, particularly with its publisher reach, to keep cookies fresh. And to have consistency of cookie reach. For us, it's all about the device ID. And again, we are blessed in being one of the first 5 apps that generally gets put on a new phone. And so that new phone gets bought, we get put on, we get the login, and boom, now I can connect that new phone to the old phone, and all the data I had about that listener and and whatever previous device is available to me on the in the new device. And by the way, I have that whole history available too.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Which is quite valuable, you
Which
said.
is a very interesting asset.
Well, thank you all for joining me up here. I hope everybody found this valuable, talk about cross-device identity management. I think we are ready for the next event.
Cool. Thanks.